Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be discussing environmental economics. As opposed to our environmental justice section, where we were really looking at how poor and marginalized communities and their lack of economic mobility mean that they're often subject to high levels of toxin and pollution. In this one, we're going to talk more about some very generic or general basic economic concepts and how they can be applied to dealing with environmental issues potentially in more positive ways. So sort of using the economy to the advantage of the environment. So sort of tangentially related to the other topics for this week, but also kind of separate and on its own. So in this video, we're going to look at some very basic economic principles and then discuss how they apply to environmental issues in particular. So economics is the branch of knowledge concerned with the production, consumption, and transfer of wealth. We're talking about money, how to make it, what to do with it, all that kind of stuff, and what drives things like price and value. So the first economic principle that we need to cover is scarcity. And scarcity is very, very important because the only reason that we purchase things is because they're not available for free. There's a scarcity. There is not enough available to everyone to meet their demands. So scarcity is officially defined as the limited availability of a commodity which may be in demand in the marketplace. And of course, the level of scarcity impacts the price. So if there's no scarcity of something, there's no market for it, i.e. it's free. Can you think of commodities, things that we use that there is no scarcity, something that you need to survive, that there's no scarcity whatsoever? The classic examples are air and sunlight. We are not charged for air typically. Oxygen bars were a thing for a little while, but not really. And so it's available in amounts that every person needs and can be freely used. No one sells air for the most part. And sunlight is the other commodity which we all depend on, for which there is no scarcity of. Sunlight drives all of our energy systems. We'll talk about that more later. Our food production, all of that. We need it for our own bodies. You need it to develop vitamin D in your in your body, and it's there for free. Everybody can access it. There's no scarcity of it. So I don't know if this still resonates with folks, but it's a gif from an old movie called Spaceballs, where air is a commodity that is bought and sold. So just sort of a dystopian future where we have to purchase the air to breathe. So scarcity is you only have an economy for something when there's scarcity. Once there's scarcity of a commodity, its cost or price is typically and basically regulated by the law of supply and demand. And supply and demand takes two variables: the supply, how much of a thing you have, and the demand, how much people want it, and they correlates them, which then in a general sense determines the price. If the supply is high and the demand is low, the price is low. If the supply is low and the demand is high, then the price is high. And so in a unregulated or unrestricted market, supply and demand is the main driver of the cost of something. When there's less of it and people want it, the cost goes up. When there's more of something that people don't want as much, the cost goes down. And so that there are lots of other factors in a real economy that help contribute to price, but in a generic sense, it comes down to supply and demand. Another major economic principle is the cost benefit. This basically says that an action should only be taken if the benefits of that action are greater or equal to the costs. And a corollary to this is that rational people will only undertake a new activity if the benefits of the activity outweigh the costs. But the benefits don't necessarily need to be monetary. But again, this is sort of, well, this sort of exemplifies or describes why people and businesses undertake actions, because the benefits outweigh the costs. And so in economic terms, people are only willing to buy a commodity if the benefits of them receiving that commodity are equal to or greater than the cost of what they would have to pay to receive it. Incentives are a way that governments or anybody can induce a person to act, to sort of change that cost-benefit analysis. And because rational people make decisions by comparing the cost and benefit, they respond to incentives. Now, it's really, really important to understand that incentives can be both positive or negative, a punishment or a reward. So you could call it incentives and disincentives, incentives being the positive and disincentives being the negative. But ultimately, in economic terms, positive and negative incentives are just called incentives. So can you think of any economic incentives, that, again, positive or negative, that are used in our economic system to change people's behavior? So just some examples are the gas tax, that is designed as a negative incentive, making gas more expensive. And one of the ideas behind it is literally to try and get people to drive less. Speeding tickets are an economic incentive for following the rules. You stay within the speed limit and you don't get a ticket, or a disincentive for speeding. You get caught speeding and you have to pay a fine. Other positive incentives that we've seen here in California are rebates for removing grass or installing more efficient appliances and fixtures to reduce water use. So the government is paying people, giving them money, an incentive to arrange their homes in a way that uses less water. Another great example of an incentive that we'll actually talk about at length in our next week in population is the way our tax system rewards families and rewards people having children. You get to pay less money in taxes for every child that you have, or every dependent, but it was really designed around children. And so the idea is that is an incentive for having more kids. There have been discussions, not so much in this country, but elsewhere in the world, for creating tax systems that actually incentivize smaller families rather than large ones. But we'll get into that next week. So that's incentives. So when we're talking about environmental economics, we're talking about how those things, incentives and disincentives, supply and demand, scarcity, all these economic principles can be applied to the environment and to natural resources. So within this discipline, environmental and natural resource economics is the application of principles of economics to the study of how environmental and natural resources are developed and managed. And this can be positive or negative. There can be economic tools that are used to benefit the environment or to hurt the environment, and all of that is kind of contained within this overarching concept of environmental economics. So it's the study of the allocation of scarce resources, including how markets function and how incentives affect people's businesses and institutions' behavior in regards to the environment. So basically, there are three spheres when it comes to economics. These are three different sort of perspectives or way of thinking about the relationship between economics and the environment. You have economic modeling. It's a way that economic predictions and forecasts can be used to think about the environment or predict how various actions might affect the environment. You have economic tools. Can we use the policies and tools that are intended to manage our economy to have positive environmental benefits? And the economic valuation, and this is trying to calculate or describe the value of the environment or natural resources in economic terms, and specifically the value of a protected environment. Can we make an economic argument for preservation or conservation? That's economic valuation. So we'll go through these one by one. Economic modeling in the environment. So as economies grow and become more technological, their overall environmental footprint increases. And so as we look at economic forecasting and predictions about how countries or economies are going to grow and change over time, we can use that as a predictive tool to understand what their impact on the environment or natural resource use might be. So, for instance, can look at greenhouse gas emissions and GDP or gross domestic product, which is often a way that countries or nations or states or cities economic health is measured by how much they're producing. That's what gross domestic product is. And see how, well, we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we can use economic modeling to predict how that will affect gross domestic product, how much we produce, and income coming in and all of that. So it's a way to potentially show that, yes, reducing greenhouse gas emissions could potentially reduce our GDP growth by some. It's not reducing the overall GDP. See, it's still rising, but it rises by slightly less, and the impact would be greenhouse gases, which are the cause of climate change, being reduced or stabilized. So that's a good tool that someone might use to help make an argument in favor of slowing or stopping climate change. And economic valuation is probably So economic valuation is, again, assigning monetary value to a resource so that a case can be made for its conservation or exploitation. And then we also want to try and understand the economic impact or value of protected natural resources like national parks or preserves. And the question is, what kind of economic value do they have? So just another quick note on this. Economic valuation of resources, it happens all the time. You know, we know what the price of oil is, and we have an estimate of what oil is left underground to be extracted, and we know the cost of extracting it within, current technology, and that helps sort of predict what the price of the resource is going to be. Timber is another one. It has a certain amount of value. All natural resources that we use have value because there's that scarcity, and by understanding the value of it, we can make cases for it to be protected or preserved. And then again, looking at more of the value of parks, national parks in particular, create a huge economic benefit. In 2017, the National Park Service estimates that people spent $35 billion in or around national parks, and this supports over 300,000 jobs. Um, and a lot of those billions go to the communities around the parks. We're talking about hotels, we're talking about restaurants, we're talking about gas stations, um, and so these are again often jobs and benefits that are coming to rural communities that may not have a lot of other economic opportunity. So it's a great case study for the economic benefit of parks and preserves. That it's not just about recreation, and it's not necessarily just like a public service, but has very, very positive economic impacts on the communities around them. And again, this can be used as the basis for an argument about preserving more land, because having preserved land, having parks, having those recreational destination creates economic benefit for the communities around them. Another way that valuation goes is again forest products. So again, this ends up being more of an argument for exploitation of resources rather than protection of them. But it can also be formulated in a way that suggests we should be using them in a way that is sustainable over the long term. So forest products are paper, lumber, everything made out of trees, tree pulp, and it's a $300 billion industry annually that employs close to 1 million people, and contributes $55 billion a year in payroll. And so on the one hand, this is an exploitive industry that is removing forests and potentially being environmentally damaging or destructive, but at the same time, this also is a very, very strong case for conserving our forest resources. So we want to make sure that we're able to do this over the long term, that this is not an industry that's going to, crash and completely run out. So a case for sustainable forest management, which we're actually getting better at, as opposed to, say, just clear cutting. Can be made based on this valuation of the products and the industry itself. Another way that economic valuation can be used, it's a little bit more abstract, is in ecosystem services. So ecosystem services are the functions that natural ecosystems provide that we benefit from. So for instance, trees and green plants and algae in the ocean producing oxygen that we require to breathe, that is an ecosystem service. Aquifers and water tables filtering pollutants out of water is another ecosystem service. And pollination of our plants and food sources, our crops, by insects is an ecosystem service. And that's one we can actually try and place a value on. And this is kind of really interesting because bees and other natural pollinators do that work of pollination for free. But some researchers tried to estimate what the cost of that labor would be if human workers had to be paid to do it. So, imagine bees moving from flower to flower being replaced by humans with paintbrushes, moving pollen from flower to flower, doing the same work. And for our food crops alone, so not counting all the other kind of plants that are out there that we use for things, but for food crops alone, we're talking about $217 billion a year if we had to replace the ecosystem service of pollinators with paid employees. And this becomes a very strong argument for preserving bees and bee population, and in particular, stopping the use of neonicotinoid pesticides, which have a very, very negative impact on bees. So it's looking at something that currently there's no scarcity of. Pollination is something that nature provides at no cost but we depend on in a really, really major way. And because we depend on that pollination, um, uh, we have to protect that resource because we could not afford to replace that ecosystem service with paid labor. So it's another case of how economic valuation can be used towards a conservation or environmental goal. So the other aspect of environmental economics is economic tools. So it's using markets and other financial tools to protect the environment or encourage private business to do so through incentives. Can you guys think of any economic tools used to protect the environment? So one of the biggest ones that has had limited success is cap and trade. This is was an attempt to reduce emissions of climate change causing greenhouse gases by creating a marketplace where the amount of emissions a business could emit is capped at a specific level. And if you needed to emit more, you had to purchase credits from businesses that were emitting less than what they were allocated. So if emitter B is able to produce their product and emit less of the carbon dioxide than they've been allocated, they can sell that carbon dioxide as a credit to emitter A, who needs to emit more than what they've allocated. And these are traded like stocks on a financial market. And the idea is that there becomes a significant incentive for emitters to produce less, because then they have another profit stream. And for emitters who emit more, it becomes a disincentive because they have to spend additional capital on the credits to release those emissions. California has a cap and trade program. It's been going on for about 9 years, and it's one of a suite of policies in the state to reduce our emissions. And it's the fourth largest cap and trade program in the world, behind the European Union, the Republic of Korea, and the Chinese province of Guangdong. And it's expected to reduce emissions by more than 16% and up to 40% by 2030. And it's really central to our state strategy for reducing climate change causing emissions. Now, it would be great if we had a national cap and trade program, but that hasn't happened yet. But in California, emitters are required to participate in this, and it is creating incentives and disincentives using economic tools to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And this is a chart shows what, through at least 2016, these trends are hard to get kind of current data on, but through 2016, greenhouse emissions were going down. They were going down, but our population and GDP were going up. These two are really important qualifying factors, because if you just saw that greenhouse gas emissions were going down, you might say, well, maybe there's less people, or maybe they're producing less stuff, which was one of the things that environmental regulations and programs like this often get accused of. Like, they're going to hurt the economy. Making emitters or polluters pollute less is going to be bad for our economy. We're not going to have as many jobs. We're not going to make as much stuff. But by showing the correlation between rising population and steadily increasing gross domestic product in California, alongside reduced greenhouse gas emissions per capita and per GDP, it shows us becoming more efficient, and that the cap and trade program is at least somewhat effective at making the reductions that we're trying to make. So when we kind of combine all of this together and start thinking about sort of a more holistic approach as opposed to individual tools or elements, we come to sort of a strategy or idea or concept called sustainability or sustainable development. And sustainable development, according to your textbook, is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own need. And so this is all about trying to achieve a financially secure present, trying to continue to make things, trying to continue to live the lifestyle with the quality of life that we expect without having environmental degradation. And to be sustainable, basically there's a concept of a triple bottom line. And that means in order to be sustainable, something has to be socially equitable, it has to be economically productive, and it has to maintain environmental quality. And if you can achieve all of these things, these three pillars of the triple bottom line, then you could be considered sustainable. So you're profitable, that's the economic side. You're not harming people, that's the social side, and you're not harming the environment, that is the environmental side. And when businesses try and meet this triple bottom line, they are considered sustainable. There's a clip that'll be in the media section on this. And some different examples of products or companies that follow this triple bottom line principle. Seventh Generation is a brand of cleaning and household products that follows the triple bottom line. And so they're using chemicals that are not bad for the environment, and they're not harming people, and they're maintaining their profitability. Seventh Generation is more expensive than other cleaning products in the grocery store, so there is a cost to being sustainable. But it nonetheless is. Of course, Seventh Generation is owned by, I don't remember if it's Johnson & Johnson or Cargill, but one of the major chemical companies that produces all the different brands on the shelf. So it's not as great as it seems, because again, it's just one brand by a company that is doing a lot of different things. So it's more like marketing. But nonetheless, the Seventh Generation products themselves are produced in a sustainable way. Oh, it's Unilever. Unilever owns Axe and Dove and Vaseline. So they are producing a sustainable product, but Unilever is certainly not a company that's following the triple bottom line method themselves. Another example of a very popular company that is following these principles is Patagonia. They don't use any chemicals in their production process. They use recycled, organic, and environmentally sound materials. They are proving that outdoor equipment and clothing can be made without causing harm to the environment, and they're also very vocally and financially supportive of environmental issues such as sustainable farming and water conservation. So they're using their money towards many environmental or social issues. And the owner of Patagonia is a billionaire. And I think this is a great example because it shows how a business can both be insanely profitable and sustainable. Now, of course, Patagonia clothing is extremely expensive. It's often 50 to 60% more expensive than other outdoor wear brands, which are already expensive to begin with. So it is not a particularly accessible product, and you have to have a certain amount of financial stability in order to purchase or own it. But for those that can, it is a sustainable option. And that is one problem with this sustainability or triple bottom line strategy, is that in the system we live in today, those products are like often more expensive. Seventh Generation and Patagonia, and you go down the organic food aisle in your grocery store and everything costs more. And we'll talk more about that during our agriculture setting, or our agriculture lesson in a couple weeks. But it is it is a downside of businesses trying to be more sustainable, as those products cost more and are not accessible to everybody. But it comes down to what are you willing to pay for, and the grocery store is a great place to have that conversation, and we will in a couple weeks. All right, that's it for this video. Check out the other attached videos for more information on environmental economics.